The photo slipped from his jacket without a sound. It landed face up on the floor between their feet. The girl bent down automatically and picked it up. She barely had time to look at it before a hand shot out and snatched it from her fingers. No shouting, no threats. No explanation. The mafia boss didn't say a single word. The room went quiet not because anyone was afraid of him, but because he was afraid of what she'd just seen. The girl froze, confused by the sudden tension, her eyes still locked on his face. Something in his expression had changed. Not anger, not arrogance. Panic. Whatever was in that photo wasn't supposed to exist anymore. And the fact that she had touched it, had seen even a fraction of it, meant the past he'd buried just reached out and grabbed him by the throat. Backhand index pointing right, stay till the end. Because that single fallen photograph would expose a secret powerful enough to destroy an empire and put an innocent girl in the most dangerous position imaginable. The hotel lobby was too quiet for a Thursday afternoon. Not empty, never empty, but subdued in that carefully managed way reserved for places that catered to money without advertising it. Soft lighting, muted colors, floors polished so often they reflected more than faces. The kind of space where people lowered their voices instinctively, even when they didn't know why. Iris Coleman stood behind the concierge desk, shoulders squared, posture perfect. She had learned how to stand like that during her first week on the job, not from training manuals but from watching who survived their probation period. Slouching made guests impatient. Too much enthusiasm made them suspicious. Neutral was safest. "Good afternoon," she said for the 100th time that day. "How may I help you?" Most guests didn't really hear her. They were on phones, checking watches, glancing past her at the elevators like the building itself was an obstacle between them and something more important. That was fine. Invisible was a skill. Iris adjusted the sleeve of her worn cardigan, careful to hide the frayed cuff, and glanced at the clock behind the desk. 20 more minutes until her break. She was already thinking about the vending machine down the hall, hoping it still had the cheaper granola bars. The doors slid open without ceremony. 3 men entered. The first thing Iris noticed wasn't their clothes or their size. It was how the room reacted. Conversations softened. A bellhop paused mid-step. The security guard near the elevator straightened subtly, hand brushing the radio at his waist. The man in the center walked like he had no reason to rush and no expectation of being stopped. His name, though Iris didn't know it yet, was Daniel Morty. He approached the desk alone, his companions fanning out just enough to be present without crowding. He wore a dark coat, unbuttoned, one hand tucked casually into the pocket. His face was calm, composed, and utterly unreadable. "Room 1408, he said. Iris typed quickly. "May I see your ID, sir?" He slid it across the counter without comment. Her eyes dropped to the card, then stopped. The name didn't mean anything to her, but the address did. A high-rise on the east side of the city, the kind of place you only lived if privacy was part of the purchase price. She handed the ID back. "Your room is ready," she said. "Elevators are to your left." "Thank you," Daniel replied. As he turned, something slipped from the inside of his jacket. Not dramatically, not loudly. It slid free and landed on the marble floor between them, face up. A photograph. Iris reacted before thinking. She stepped around the desk and bent down to pick it up. "I think you dropped." Her voice cut off. She saw it, just for a second, long enough for the image to register before a hand shot out and snatched the photo from her fingers. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't scold her, didn't threaten, didn't even look angry. He stared at the photograph in his hand as if it might vanish. The silence pressed down on the lobby. Iris straightened slowly, her heart pounding, her fingers tingling where the photo had been taken from her. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to." Daniel looked up. Something in his expression had changed. Not fury, fear, just for a flicker of a second, so fast most people would have missed it. His composure cracked. Then it was gone. He slipped the photograph back into his jacket with deliberate care. "It's fine," he said quietly, 2 words, that was all. He turned and walked toward the elevators. His men followed, the doors closed, the lobby exhaled. Only then did Iris realize she'd been holding her breath. She returned to the desk on autopilot, her pulse still racing. The image replayed in her mind whether she wanted it to or not. A young woman, a child in her arms, both smiling. The woman looked familiar, that was the part that unsettled her. She shook her head sharply. "You saw nothing," she told herself. "You don't know anything." That rule had kept her safe her entire life. The security guard approached the desk. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Iris replied too quickly, just surprised him. The guard nodded but didn't look convinced. "Those guys," he muttered. "Not the kind you surprise." She forced a small smile. "I'll remember that." Upstairs, Daniel Morty stood in his suite, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. Cold, controlled. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the photograph again. His thumb traced the edge unconsciously. "That shouldn't have happened," one of his men said behind him. Daniel didn't respond. "She saw it," the man continued. "Should we?" "No," Daniel said softly. The word was final. He folded the photograph carefully and slid it into the inner pocket of his jacket, the pocket closest to his chest. "She didn't understand what she was holding," he said. "And if she did," Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then I wouldn't be standing here quietly," he replied. He turned from the window. "Find out who she is," he said. "No pressure, no noise." The man nodded his name. Daniel remembered the badge on the desk. Iris Coleman. Back in the lobby, Iris finished her shift in a haze. She answered questions, printed receipts, smiled when expected. But her mind kept returning to the photograph, to the woman's face, to the child. To the look in Daniel Morty's eyes when he'd taken it back. She didn't know why it mattered, she just knew it did. As she clocked out and stepped into the evening air, Iris told herself what she always did when something felt wrong: "It's not your business. Go home." She walked toward the bus stop, unaware that high above her, a man who controlled entire blocks of the city was replaying the same moment in his mind. Not because of what she'd done, but because of what she'd seen, and because some photographs weren't meant to survive the past. Daniel Morty did not sleep that night. He lay on the edge of the king-sized bed in the hotel suite, fully dressed, shoes still on, the city glowing below the windows like a living map of power and consequence. The photograph rested on the table beside him, face down now, as if denying it visibility might weaken its hold. It didn't. He knew exactly what Iris Coleman had seen, not enough to understand, but enough to recognize. And recognition was dangerous. Daniel had spent 20 years building a reputation that relied on one rule above all others: nothing personal ever surfaced. Names disappeared, records burned, faces became rumors. The past stayed buried because he made sure it stayed buried. That photograph should not have existed. And now a poor hotel concierge had touched it. At 6 in the morning, Daniel stood by the window and made a call. "Tell me everything about Iris Coleman," he said calmly. A pause. "Not just records, habits, patterns, who she speaks to, where she goes after work." Another pause. "No," Daniel added quietly. "She's not a threat, she's a variable." He ended the call and poured himself a coffee he didn't drink. Iris noticed the change immediately, not something obvious. No men following her, no cars idling too long at corners, nothing that would trigger panic. It was worse than that. Things felt too smooth. The bus arrived on time. The streets were clear. No one bumped into her. No one rushed her. She arrived at the hotel early and found her manager waiting at the desk. "Iris," he said, smiling too quickly. "You're doing great work." Her stomach tightened. "Thank you," she replied carefully. "We've decided to move you to the front desk permanently," he continued. "Higher visibility, more responsibility. That wasn't a promotion, that was proximity." "I'm comfortable where I am," Iris said softly. Her manager's smile flickered. "This is where you are now." By noon, Daniel had a file. Iris Coleman. Age 22, education, incomplete community college. Employment, concierge, part-time library assistant. Family, mother deceased, father unknown. Residency, Southside apartments, rent controlled. Daniel's gaze lingered on the family section. No father. That explained the way she moved through space. People raised without safety learned how to minimize themselves. She's clean, his man said. No record, no known associations. Daniel nodded. And the woman in the photo? The man hesitated. We're still confirming. Daniel's jaw tightened. Confirm faster. Iris's second shift passed uneasily. Guests asked more questions. Management hovered. Security checked in too often. At one point, a woman in an expensive coat approached the desk. Hi, she said warmly. You must be Iris. Yes, Iris replied, already uneasy. I'm Clara, the woman said. Corporate relations. I like to know who's making a good impression. Iris smiled politely. I'm just doing my job. Clara leaned in slightly. You handled Mr. Morty very professionally yesterday. Iris's breath caught. I'm glad, she said carefully. Clara's eyes sharpened just a fraction. He's not used to surprises. I didn't intend to. Oh, I know, Clara said smoothly. That's why you're still here. Still, the word stuck. That evening, Iris walked home under a sky heavy with clouds. She took the long route not because she was being followed, but because she needed time to think. The photograph haunted her, the woman's face, the child's eyes. There had been something familiar there, something she couldn't place. At her apartment, she found the hallway light on. That was unusual. Inside her unit, nothing was out of place, except the photograph on her kitchen table. Her heart slammed into her ribs. She didn't touch it. She didn't scream. She just stood there, staring. A note lay beside it. You dropped this before you could see it properly. I thought you deserved a better look. No signature. Iris swallowed hard. She picked up the photo with trembling fingers. The woman in it was younger than she remembered, but unmistakable. It was her mother, holding a baby. Iris. Her breath left her in a broken gasp. Across town, Daniel Morty stood in a dimly lit office, phone pressed to his ear. She recognized her, his man said quietly. Daniel closed his eyes. Good, he replied. Then we stop pretending this is coincidence. And the girl, Daniel's voice lowered, she's no longer incidental. He stared at the city lights, jaw tight. For the first time in years, the past wasn't knocking politely. It had walked straight through the door and sat at his table. And Iris Coleman, quiet, invisible Iris, was holding the only piece of proof that could unravel everything, not because she wanted power, but because she had seen a photograph that was never meant to fall. Iris sat at the kitchen table for a long time without moving. The photograph lay in front of her, edges curling slightly from age. She traced the outline of it with her eyes but didn't touch it again. Her hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her fingers ached. Her mother, alive, smiling, that alone shattered everything Iris thought she knew. She had been told her mother died when she was 6. A sudden illness, hospital bills, closed casket, no extended family to ask questions, no one who lingered long enough to contradict the story. She had accepted it because children learned early which truths were safe to accept. But this was undeniable. Her mother's smile in the photograph wasn't posed. It was familiar, the same slight tilt of the head Iris saw in the mirror sometimes, the same dimple in the left cheek, and the baby in her arms was Iris herself. Her breath shook as she finally picked up the photo. How? She whispered. A soft knock came at the door, not urgent, not aggressive, controlled. Iris's heart pounded, but she didn't panic. Panic wasted time. She slipped the photograph into her bag, stood, and approached the door quietly. Ms. Coleman, a man's voice said from the other side. My name is Victor Hale. I work for Daniel Morty. We need to talk. Iris closed her eyes for a moment, then she opened the door. Victor Hale didn't step inside. He stood in the hallway, hands visible, posture respectful. He looked like a man who knew exactly how threatening he could be and chose not to be. You left this, Iris said, holding up the envelope. Yes, Victor replied. Mr. Morty wanted you to have context. Context? Iris snapped. You broke into my apartment. Victor didn't deny it. Yes, she laughed bitterly. You people really don't understand boundaries, do you? Victor met her gaze evenly. We understand consequences. She stepped back, then talk. Victor entered and closed the door behind him. Daniel Morty watched the city from the same hotel window as before, phone in hand, listening to the muted echo of Victor's voice through the line. She knows, Victor said, all of it. Daniel exhaled slowly, and he asked. She hasn't asked for money or protection. Daniel's jaw tightened. That tracks. Victor explained carefully, not all at once, piece by piece. Daniel Morty had once been younger, hungrier, less careful. He had trusted the wrong people, made deals that required silence to survive. Iris's mother, Alina Coleman, had been part of that world briefly. Not as a criminal, but as someone adjacent, someone who knew too much by accident. She wasn't killed, Victor said. She was relocated. Iris stared at him. You kidnapped her. Victor nodded. To keep her alive. And me? Iris demanded. What about me? Victor hesitated. You were supposed to disappear with her. But I didn't. No, Victor said quietly. Someone made a decision. Iris's chest burned. Who? Victor looked away. Daniel. The words hung in the air like smoke. He chose the version of the story that carried the least risk, Victor continued. A dead woman, a child raised without her, clean lines. Iris laughed, sharp and humorless. Clean. Victor's voice dropped. He thought it was mercy. Iris slammed her palm on the table. You don't get to decide that? No, Victor agreed. And that's why we're here now. She stared at him. Why now? Because the photograph resurfaced, Victor said, and because you picked it up. Across the city, Daniel Morty finally sat down. For the first time in hours, he pulled the photograph from his pocket again and placed it on the desk in front of him. Alina, Iris, a life he had severed and sealed away. I didn't think she'd remember, he murmured. Victor's voice came through the phone. She didn't. She recognized. Daniel closed his eyes. That's worse, he said. Iris paced her apartment, rage and disbelief colliding inside her chest. She was alive, she said again, as if saying it might make it real. You all let me think she was dead. Victor nodded, yes. Where is she? Victor hesitated. That depends on what happens next. Iris stopped pacing and faced him. You're using her as leverage, she said flatly. Victor met her gaze. No, we're using the truth. She shook her head. You don't get to do that either. Victor's phone buzzed. He checked it, then looked up. He wants to meet you. Iris laughed. Of course he does. Victor added quietly, he's afraid. That surprised her. Of me? Victor shook his head. Of what he owes you. The meeting took place that night. Neutral ground, a private dining room in the hotel restaurant. No guards inside, no weapons visible. Daniel Morty stood when Iris entered. That alone told her everything. You shouldn't have picked up the photo, he said softly. I shouldn't have existed, Iris replied. Silence fell. Daniel gestured for her to sit. She didn't. My mother, Iris said, voice steady despite the storm inside her, was alive, and you let me grow up thinking she was dead. Daniel nodded once. Yes, why? Because I believed distance was safer than truth, he said. I was wrong. She stared at him. Where is she? Daniel didn't answer immediately. She's alive, he said finally, and she's been safe. For you, Iris snapped. For her, Daniel corrected. Iris felt tears burn behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. You don't get forgiveness, she said, but you're going to give me answers. Daniel inclined his head. Ask. She took a breath. What happens now? Daniel looked at her, really looked. Now, he said, you decide whether I erase this photograph forever or whether I finally pay the debt I've been avoiding. The room felt smaller. Iris realized something then with terrifying clarity. She wasn't a threat because she'd seen the photo. She was a threat because she mattered to the person in it, and that made her powerful in a way she'd never asked for. Daniel Morty did not offer Iris a drink. That alone told her he was done performing. They stood in the private dining room, the city glowing through the tall windows behind him, the table between them untouched. The photograph lay in the center, its presence louder than any argument. "I don't want money," Iris said first. "I don't want protection, and I don't want apologies." Daniel nodded slowly. "Good, none of those would be enough." She folded her arms, grounding herself. "I want my mother." Daniel's jaw tightened. "She isn't a bargaining chip." "She already was," Iris shot back. "You made her one when you decided what parts of her life I was allowed to know." The words landed. Daniel exhaled through his nose, the controlled calm cracking just slightly. "You're right." That admission cost him more than any threat ever could. "She's alive," he continued. "She has been for years. She chose not to contact you." Iris stiffened. "You're lying." "No," Daniel said quietly. "I gave her a choice, leave completely or risk being found through you. And she chose disappearance," Iris whispered. "She chose you living without a target on your back," Daniel replied. The room felt colder. "You don't get to decide what danger I face," Iris said. "You already stole enough." Daniel met her gaze, then take it back. She blinked. "What?" "The truth," he said. "All of it, publicly if you want." Iris's heart skipped. "You'd let that happen?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Yes. That would destroy you." "No," he corrected. "It would end me." Silence pressed down again, heavier this time. Before Iris could respond, Victor stepped into the room, tension sharp in his posture. "We have a problem," he said. Daniel didn't turn. "Speak." "They know the photograph surfaced," Victor said, "and they know she has it." Iris's blood ran cold. "Who's they?" Daniel's expression hardened. "People who benefited from the version of history where your mother didn't exist." Victor added, "They're not interested in negotiation." A distant sound echoed through the hallway, raised voices, hurried footsteps. "They're here," Iris said. Daniel nodded once. "I assumed they would be." He turned to Iris. "This is the moment you walk away." She laughed softly, incredulous. "And leave my mother buried again?" Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If you stay, you become leverage for me against me." "I already am," Iris replied, "and I didn't choose it." Victor checked his phone. 2 floors down, they're forcing their way past security. Daniel's gaze flicked to the photograph on the table. "Give it to me," he said quietly to Iris. "I'll end this." She stared at him. "How?" "I'll trade myself," he said. "The truth. The records, everything they've been protecting." Iris's pulse roared in her ears. "You'd sacrifice your empire." Daniel's mouth curved in a humorless smile. "Empires built on silence don't deserve to last." Before she could answer, the door burst open. 3 men entered, well-dressed, calm, and unmistakably dangerous. One of them smiled at Iris. "So you're the girl," he said. "You've caused quite a stir." Daniel stepped between them. "This is between us." The man laughed. "Everything is between us." His eyes dropped to the table. "Is that it?" Iris reached the photograph first. She didn't hand it over, she tore it in half. The sound was small but devastating. Daniel inhaled sharply. The men froze. Iris's voice was steady. "You don't get it, none of you do." She tore it again. "And you never will." The man's smile vanished. "That was a mistake." "No," Iris said, "that was freedom." Sirens wailed outside, real ones this time. Daniel looked at Victor. "You called them." Victor nodded. "Hours ago." The men backed away slowly, realizing the trap too late. "You'll burn everything," one of them hissed at Daniel. Daniel met his gaze. "Good." As agents flooded the hallway, the men were restrained, shouting fading into echoes. When the room finally fell quiet, Iris sagged into a chair, hands shaking. Daniel knelt in front of her. "She'll come now," he said softly, "your mother. She won't have to hide anymore." Tears finally slipped down Iris's cheeks. "You don't get redemption," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "I know, but you get to fix this," she said. "That's all I care about." Daniel stood, shoulders heavy but straighter than before. "I will," he said. "No matter the cost." As they led him away, Daniel glanced back once. not at the photograph, at Iris. For the first time, the silence he'd relied on his entire life was gone, and in its place stood the only thing strong enough to end him, the truth. The courthouse steps were crowded, but Iris Coleman felt strangely alone as she stood at the edge of the scene. Cameras clicked. Reporters spoke into microphones with voices sharpened by excitement. Names that had once been whispered were now being said out loud, repeated, dissected, dragged into daylight. Daniel Morty's name echoed more than any other. He stood several feet away, hands cuffed, posture straight, expression unreadable. He wore a simple gray suit, no coat, no entourage, no illusion of control left to maintain. For the first time since Iris had met him, he looked exactly like what he was, a man facing consequences. He didn't look at her as agents led him down the steps. That was deliberate. If he had, she might have faltered. 3 weeks passed. The city adjusted quickly. Accounts were frozen, properties seized, deals unraveled. People who had once benefited from Daniel's silence scrambled to distance themselves, to rewrite their roles in a story that had finally begun telling itself without permission. Iris returned to work at the hotel. No one mentioned the incident directly, but everything was different. Management treated her carefully. Guests were more polite than before. The security guard nodded at her with a quiet respect that hadn't been there before. Ruth pulled her aside one afternoon. "I don't know what you stepped into," she said softly, "but you stepped outstanding." Iris smiled faintly. "That wasn't the goal." "It usually isn't," Ruth replied. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, no return address. Iris recognized the handwriting instantly. She sat at the kitchen table, fingers trembling slightly, and opened it. "Iris, if you're reading this, then the protections are gone, which means I can finally speak freely." Her breath caught. "I never stopped thinking about you, not for a day. I watched from a distance because I was told that distance was love. I was wrong." Tears blurred the page. "I'm coming home." The letter was signed. Mom Alina Coleman stood at the bus station with a single suitcase and eyes that looked both older and exactly the same. Iris spotted her instantly. They stared at each other across the platform for a long moment, neither moving, both afraid that movement might break the reality of it. Then Alina dropped the suitcase. Iris ran. They collided in a tangle of arms and breath and sobs that had waited 16 years to exist. People passed by without slowing, unaware that something monumental was happening between two women clinging to each other in the middle of an ordinary place. "I'm sorry," Alina whispered over and over. "I'm so sorry." Iris shook her head, crying into her mother's shoulder. "You're here, that's enough." They sat on a bench afterward, fingers intertwined, the world slowly returning to focus. "He told me everything," Alina said quietly. "What he did, what he allowed." Iris nodded. "He paid for it." Alina studied her daughter. "And you?" Iris took a deep breath. "I stopped carrying his silence." The trial was swift. There were too many records, too many witnesses, too much truth stacked too neatly to ignore. Daniel Morty pleaded guilty, not for leniency, but for closure. When asked to speak, he didn't look at the jury, he looked at Iris. "I built my power on what people were afraid to say," he said calmly, "and I lost it the moment someone refused to stay quiet." He was sentenced to decades, no drama. No spectacle, just an ending. Months later, Iris stood behind the concierge desk again. Same lobby, same polished floors, different posture. A guest approached, fumbling with his wallet as he checked out. "Sorry," he said, embarrassed. "I dropped this." A photograph slipped free and landed at Iris's feet. She bent down and picked it up. It showed a family smiling into the sun. She handed it back gently. "Be careful," she said. "Some things matter more than we realize." The man nodded, confused but grateful, and walked away. Iris returned to her desk. That night, she went home to an apartment that no longer felt like a hiding place. Her mother cooked dinner while talking too fast, trying to fit years into minutes. Later, as they sat on the couch, Alina looked at her daughter. "You didn't take anything from him," she said. "Not money, not protection." Iris smiled softly. I took my life back. The photograph that started everything no longer existed, but its impact remained. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing a powerful man can lose isn't his empire, it's control over the story. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who ends it. Not by shouting, not by demanding, but by refusing to look away.